Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach. Welcome to another player profile. We're going to discuss a man who I've received quite a few requests for, and that's Devon Smith, obviously the new bomber. And he has been one man that does pop up in a bit of discussion. As I mentioned, not a stack of forward line options that we can absolutely bank on. So I guess we are looking down the line to that sort of 400 to 450 mark. Perhaps a bit of value, perhaps someone who can work their way into that elite category. And Smith seems to have conducted a bit of interest in regards to that. So I just want to discuss a few things about him because obviously, probably most of the viewers are Melbourne-based and Victorian-based. We haven't seen a stack of Devon Smith, just seen the odd great highlight, a beautiful goal from the boundary, but we don't really know a stack of his absolute substance. But we'll go through a few of the numbers. Of course, 2012 debut, 63.4, and then working our way to the present, 70, 91.2 was one of the years, 2014, that really broke out, and that's one I'll focus on fairly heavily. Then 89 in 2015, 81.8, and last year, 79.9. So it fell away quite drastically for Smith at the end. The writing was on the wall, really. Wasn't selected in any of the finals and had a really poor end of the season in particular, clearly, given that selection, and didn't feature. So he went searching for a new home. That was always on the cards, and he has made it clear that he is searching for a bit more midfield time. So looking at a few of the numbers and looking at where that drop-off was, because I think most people's interest will be fueled by the fact that maybe he can get back to somewhere in that 2014 form and, of course, build on that a little bit more. And whenever a player switches clubs, it can breathe new life, new opportunity. The Bombers' midfield is something that they will be looking to add to. Of course, no Watson, and Stanton of old is gone, and Goddard on the twilight, I suppose. So there is going to be a fairly young flavour alongside Heppel and Parrish and McGrath sort of working their way through that midfield. And perhaps Smith, maybe even Stringer, could be part of that. Now, focusing on 2014, if you want to compare it to 2017, I'd like to have a look at the numbers. I always find it's good to compare a player's best season or the season that you'd like them to return to in comparison to the last season, and where were those drop-offs. Disposals, 21.5 down to 18.5, just the 3 down. Goals, 1.2 down to 0.9 per game. Tackles, 4.5 up to 4.9 in 2017, perhaps reflective of the game itself. And clearances, 2 up to 2.2, contested possession, about the same. Not much change in the numbers. Often when you see a fairly reasonable point difference in his scoring, he's gone down 12 SuperCoach points per game. Normally you will see some indicator drop off quite significantly, but it wasn't really the case. He's winning a little bit less of the ball, he's kicking slightly less goals, but that's just one less goal every 3 weeks. 0.3 drop off's not much. So where does Smith need to improve, and where is his big difference from that 2014 form? Well, look, he's never going to be a big ball winner, and he does rely a fair bit, at least as a forward, on kicking a few goals to score well. Most of his better games involve 2 to 4 goals, 20 to 25 touches, sometimes even just 18 to 19 touches. Bit of forward line pressure, equates himself to a nice 110. That's his blueprint. Will that change with him going to the midfield? It may well. He hasn't really been an accumulator. I had previewed Matty Crouch the other day. He's the type, alongside your Neils and Zach Merritts and Tom Mitchells, they accumulate, where Devon Smith falls into that category, like we talk about with Bontempelli, where they don't need as much of the ball to really hurt you. They're more of those impact guys. And I think that's why, looking at the numbers, it doesn't really paint a picture as to where he truly lost those points, because as we know, the SuperCoach scoring system does reward players for really performing at the big time moments in a game. If you play much better when the heat is in the game, when it's on the line, you'll score a bit more points. They like to weight the points. Of course, you get, 3,300 points allocated to each game. Of course, you get a slightly better weighted point if you play better when it's really hot, where if you rack up 5 touches and kick a goal when you're up by 80 points in the last quarter, well, you're not going to get as much bang for your buck. So without really trawling through all the games in 2014, I would have to come to the conclusion that he did play bigger in those better moments and had more impact. I think we do see and talk a bit about impact with SuperCoach players and how important it is. And I think that is something that Smith is all about, having a big impact with not as many touches, but really stamping himself with a big goal when it matters and really establishing himself at some critical moments in the game. But obviously that fell away last year. Another thing I want to look at was his hundreds. Now, again, looking at some of his games, it is tough to get a read on exactly what he's going to give you because he is a bit of a roller coaster. Even that 2015, I'm not fully sold on. I mean, he scored 170 against the Suns in whatever round it was later in the season, which he really beat up on them. And other than that, it wasn't a fantastic season. I mean, I know you can't take away a guy who scores 170. He still scored it. But if you look at all his other games, it was really just the odd spattering of hundreds, because in 2015, it was just 7 out of 19 tons aside from that 170. And again in 2014, just the 8 out of 2100. So I suppose, where are you really looking for a premium? Of course, a guy who's averaged 90, some players you might see maybe half their games hundreds, or around that sort of ratio. You might see a guy average, score 110, then 90, then 102, then a 79, and it works its way out to an average of 90. Where Smith seems to be more your 115 plus sort of a guy, and then 70s and 80s. Just looking at those 16 tons across 2014 and 2015, 11 of those were 110 plus. Now, of course, that's not quite a huge ceiling, but it does show that when he gets 100, he does go on with it. A lot of them were 110, but there were a lot of 120s and 130s, and of course that 170. I didn't quite count up exactly how many those ratio breakdowns were, but from memory, if there was 11 tons out of those 16, the 110 plus, I'd be guessing 6 or 7 then went beyond 120, roughly around that. So what am I trying to say? When he has a good game, it's generally pretty good. Other times he can go missing or get shut down. Now that sort of a role or nature of role can change by going in the midfield. That's why we get a little bit concerned about forward line time, and we speak so much about getting time in the midfield, because sometimes you can be a little bit dependent on how the team goes and how the day's going for the side, and all of a sudden the creative forward gets a little bit less supply, doesn't have a great day, didn't get an opportunity to have a great day sometimes. So perhaps we can put that down to some inconsistency, the role. But overall, what are we really looking at for Devon Smith? He's priced at $439,000, and he's really that awkward price. He's really in that price that if you're going with him, you really need him to elevate himself into that high 90s average, which would be a considerable jump. But he is up against the likes of DeGoey, Petrarca, even someone Jack Martin in that sort of price range. So where do I stand with Devon Smith? To be honest, at the moment, I haven't even considered him. To me, I look at Smith and he's a bit too much of a barometer type. He can be a little bit up, a little bit down sometimes, a little bit hot and cold. When he's on, he's on. He's good. When it's not his day, just with the nature of his position so far, the fact he doesn't get easy possessions, he's not a guy who, gets 30 plus too often. So therefore, when he isn't getting his 21, 22 and kicking a few goals, all of a sudden his matches are looking a little bit more like 13 to 16 touches and 1 goal too. And there is a bit more of a way to drop off in comparison to a bloke who goes from averaging 33 or getting 33 touches a game down to 24, and you can always make up for that in the midfield by getting more tackles and working hard. So I think we can put that inconsistency down to the nature of the forward line role, which beggars the question, will he get more midfield time? Because most of you out there who are going to consider him are probably looking at him getting more midfield minutes. Of course, that's a question that can only be answered probably in 3 to 4 weeks when we really get the pre-season underway. He has been training with the midfield group. That's a positive sign, as has Christian Petrarca, as have quite a few guys. I mean, there'll be a number of players training with certain groups, but what we really need to know is we need to see it on game day, practice game day, and see the breakdown. whether it's 70% forward, 30% mid-time. Is he 50-50? I think that's when we can really start to make an exact decision. For me, it's got to be a no, certainly at the moment. And even in the future, I just could not see myself going with him. I'm really big on Petrarca, big fan. I'll profile him soon enough. And I'm a bit more excited about, say, Dalhouse further up the ranks in the price-wise. I just don't have that trust in him. You know when you have that gut feel about certain players? Some players, you just don't trust them as much. Maybe it's their style of game. Maybe it's their history of scoring. But for me, it would take a hell of a lot of convincing for me to even put him in the frame. That's not to say you guys out there won't be, because I have obviously got a few requests. There's a bit of interest out there. But for me, there's just a little bit too much risk, and I don't see enough reason to pick him at this stage. Who knows what pre-season could hold? The Bombers certainly need some extra class for that midfield, and Smith does have that in spades. So certainly give me your thoughts. Hopefully a few guys who did request this enjoyed that one, and I'd like to see your or hear your opinion. Give me a comment below, and of course like the video, subscribe to the channel. Hopefully click over that 1,000 mark, perhaps by early next week. It'd be fantastic. We have been flying and certainly getting stuck into it. So thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you guys soon. Cheers.